Good morning. My name is Alan Morgan. I work with the Building State Capacity and Productivity Center, which is a part of Advance Westat, that is a federally funded operation with the sole goal of supporting state education agencies. This morning we have one of the leaders in the United States in a state education agency, somewhat a little newer to the capacity than some, but in this era where the tenure is more like 2 or 3 years,
Right.
Secretary Rivera is becoming one of the veterans. He's moved up a number of places just within the last 6 months or year in his role. January or so of last year, you were confirmed by the Pennsylvania Senate?
January of last year, so it's been about a year and 4 months.
Yeah. Well, congratulations.
I'm midway through being a veteran, I guess.
You're getting close to tenure.
Yeah, absolutely.
This morning we're going to talk a little bit about a rather contemporary topic to chief state school officers, and it has to do with the Every Student Succeeds Act. And every chief that I've talked with in the last number of months since the passage of ESSA, as some people refer to it, Every Student Succeeds Act, have expressed both optimism and a certain level of trepidation about how this is going to go. It's the first time in many years since the adoption of No Child Left Behind that states have really had an opportunity to do some things that they have not heretofore perhaps had the capacity or opportunity to do. So I want to start this morning with a question of Secretary Rivera, and we again are very appreciative of your taking the time. You come to this role with a considerable amount of experience in public education. You've been a superintendent, you've been a teacher, you've been an administrator, all the right credentials to do this job very well. And I am very confident, as is your governor and the people of Pennsylvania, that this is going to be a challenge that you're up for. But let's talk a little bit about that. What do you, as you kind of look down the road, 18 months from now, you're going to be in full implementation mode.
Yes.
A lot of steps to be taken between today's date and that point in time. What's likely to be the biggest hurdle, the biggest challenge, or what do you see as the biggest opportunity? And you can take those either way you want to, Secretary.
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely correct in stating this is both an opportunity, and at the same time a challenge. I think anytime you're dealing in policy, anytime you're dealing in change, there are sets of constituencies. One set that may not necessarily get involved or just takes the wait and see approach. Others who are wholeheartedly engaged and wanting to see change and improvement, and others who've invested in the current state of policy and conditions of education and don't want to see change. So I think we are now at a point where we're planning, preparing, and really driving our path forward, in which we're engaging with all of those stakeholder groups. And I think for us in the Department of Education and the PA Department of Education, we've seen this as an exciting time. I mean, every member of my team and myself, we've accepted this responsibility because we want it to be change agents. We didn't take it with expectation of finding comfort and sitting back and accepting all things as they were. When the governor gave us a call to action, he's made education his #1 priority, and he allowed us to aggressively move forward and to create policy that we believe is in the best interest of children, of students, teachers, and the communities we serve. So, as the opportunity that ESSA or ESSA provides to the department is to relook at and rethink about federal policy and rethink federal mandates. And in PA, it's going to give us an opportunity to be much more holistically focused on the needs of students and the needs of their families. We believe, especially here in the Commonwealth, that we've been very high stakes test centric. It's been in terms of looking at one single measure. There are cases where 60 to 90% of our evaluation of schools and students
Based
are
upon
aligned
the-
to standardized
Ah,
tests.
okay.
So this will present an opportunity for us to think more holistically about education, and we're excited about that opportunity.
So what other kind of indicators do you think you might use beyond those standardized test results that have been given so much attention during the hearing process, which there still are a number of test requirements that are part of Every Student Succeeds? What else are you going to look at in Pennsylvania?
So I can share with you what we're going to look at, only because one of the areas that we're priding ourselves in is that this is a very inclusive process. We've brought together hundreds of stakeholders to really engage in 4 areas of the process: educator effectiveness, educator certification, accountability, and assessment.
Okay.
And our commitment to our stakeholders, and our stakeholders are everything from educators to those being educated and industry leaders. So and policymakers. So our commitment to them was that this would be their plan. So we have an idea of what we're starting to hear already. But I couldn't necessarily say this will be the plan because we're allowing our stakeholders to drive the plan. And we're being an active participant. But I can share with you, for example, when you just look at, educational science and educational proven practice, best practice, so to speak, we know that indicators such as reading level attainment, math level attainment, we know indicators of attendance, we know looking at English language proficiency for English language learners and meeting the needs of our special needs students, having college and career readiness standards in place. So these are all factors that we know, just in being educators, are indicators of success, while at the same time indicators that will allow us to use early warning opportunities to ensure that our kids are being as successful as they can, and we're not losing students in the process.
So you paved the way in that particular response to narrow the focus for me just a little bit on the topic of strategic communication. How do you've got all these stakeholders out there, many of which are very vocal, some that are not so vocal, but you've got to draw out their opinions and thoughts, recommendations, et cetera, and beliefs. So tell me a little bit about how your agency communicates with this incredibly broad array of stakeholders on what will be some very new behaviors that are going to have to be put in place in Pennsylvania.
Well, as you know, in the world of education, and having spent practically now half my life in education, you can never communicate enough. I mean, even when you think you've saturated the market and the stakeholder groups with information, there's always someone or a group of individuals who have said, first time I've heard it, or I didn't hear it, I didn't know.
Tell me.
Yeah. So first and foremost, it's not taking for granted that we have a great communication plan in place. It's over communicating, sharing our message over and over and over again, and not assuming at all that our message is getting out to a diverse stakeholder group. So what we did first when we started off, we engaged with partners that we connect with on a frequent basis, but we've asked them to, at minimal, communicate and share this information with 10 people.
Really?
And we've given them the opportunity to share with as many people as they wanted.
Right.
And as a result, it's been amazing. We've been getting a response from our stakeholders, individuals who want to participate, but we've also been very clear this is a working group. So folks have volunteered to be part of the working group. Others have asked to come and observe their open meetings, so they will be able to just show up and observe the process as it takes place. We're engaging very aggressively social media. So while the meeting's taking place, we'll be tweeting out, using our Facebook page, and just getting that information for folks who are at home, and making the research, the agenda, the notes from the meeting available to everyone on our website. So I think we're going to make the information available. It's just us now ensuring that anyone who wants to be actively engaged and involved at different levels will know they have access to their information.
So the Secretary Rivera power of 10 approach is where you're taking this in many respects. So let me just kind of move this a little further into the detail part, in a sense. U.S. Department of Ed is engaged in this rulemaking process, and when legislation moves its way into eventually classrooms, there are a lot of steps in between. And right now, one of the steps is what are the regulations going to look like coming down from the feds? We know there are a lot of folks, including U.S. Congress, that are watching that process very carefully. We all are, in many respects. A couple of big issues of late that got a lot of attention: special ed testing and supplement non-supplant issues, what have you. What do you see in the the rulemaking process that either you're concerned about, would want people to be really careful about making sure there is full compliance with the intent of the legislation, as well as in what can practically be done in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania?
So the rulemaking process has been very interesting for me to observe. I mean, having been an educator, I was not fully aware of the nuanced nature of lawmaking, and not only at the federal level, but even, at the state level as well. And I think the positive aspect of the process that the U.S. Department of Education is engaging in is the fact that they're really taking their time to involve many stakeholders as well, and listening to to the Assembly, listening to our lawmakers to ensure they have a voice and a say. First and foremost, you want to involve as many of our leaders as you can to really solicit not only feedback but support as part of the process. One of my concerns, and probably comes from just again years in the classroom, is how long the process can sometimes take.
Right.
So there is a beauty in taking your time to do it right. But I always
you're shortening the implementation time.
Shortening implementation time, right? And at the same time, I put my teacher hat on, and you never say, well, I'm going to engage in a new educational practice or a new curriculum. So guess what, guys? You who are sitting in front of me this year, you may not benefit from this level of instruction, but I'll be good going next year. You don't say that as a teacher. You think each and every day you have to maximize opportunities and instruction for the kids that are in front of you. So as a secretary, not only myself but my team of educators back at the department, we in terms of implementation, we ask ourselves every day, how can we maximize instructional opportunities for the kids that are there now, and then set the foundation to improve for children that will be there, in a month and years from now. So I think within that lies, both opportunity and challenges. Our children are dependent on whatever changes come to play, and I think as we look to engage with students and educators much more holistically, we can ensure that we're not only improving instruction for students in our classrooms, but we're really improving the quality of life of schools.
So think about the chiefs across the country that are facing the same challenges right now that you're facing, and it is true in every state and territory. Folks are just trying to figure out what the right thing is to do, how soon we can be done, with whom they have to help ensure there is that kind of level of communication. What about half of the nation's chiefs have been in office for literally a year or less or so. So you now, having had somewhat more experience, but very particularly because you've had a lot of experience in public education, as you said, half your life, what if you were to offer some bit of counsel, some bit of advice, and you're not a presumptive person, you're not going to come in and say, well, this is how they ought to do it in X other state, but you're also someone who has some counsel that I suspect you could offer to other chiefs. What would you encourage them to look for? What would you want them to maybe learn from your experience in Pennsylvania by doing? What is it? What bit of advice would you pass on to your counterparts?
I would think first and foremost, educating the public, educating the General Assembly, educating our lawmakers, the administration of government is key. I think what we tend to learn when we're immersed in this world of education, we kind of assume some pretty complex strategies and complex history and method and scientific method, we tend to think of it as common sense. When you're looking outside of your world of education, to a lay person or a business leader or a lawmaker, it may not be common sense.
That's right.
And so we want to take a moment to take a step back and be very intentional, much more intentional about how we introduce information, how we introduce strategies, and how we engage stakeholders in the conversation. I also realize, we're very fortunate here in the Commonwealth that our governor is extremely supportive. He has made education his number one priority. So we have an opportunity to engage, with our leader around educational practice and the future of education. So if, other chiefs have that opportunity and they're as fortunate as I am, to continue to discuss and have those deeper conversations with their state's leader. And if not, try to make the time to really orient, the leadership team around, the direction they're looking to invest and engage in. And I think the other, area of practice is just really pulling together a comprehensive team. Although I've been in the classroom and I've been an administrator, and I enjoy reading, education literature. I realize every time I sit with a new stakeholder group, or every time I sit with a member of my team, I learn something new. And one aspect of this process, us having been engaged with stakeholders, I've learned much more than I've been able to share about this process. And I think as a result, it's making us a better team, and there'll be a better product for our children.
Very good. Maybe two, you may have an additional one to add to this, but two quick things I want to kind of run by you. A number of states have experienced particular budget challenges in their recent history, particularly states like my own, like New Mexico, that has relied pretty heavily on oil and gas revenue and what have you as part of the budget. Obviously those numbers aren't what they used to be, and so it has imposed a set of restrictions that we might not have had. This is a bit of a complex question, but it's one you'll fully understand. Is there a way that the Every Student Succeeds Act can frankly help the Commonwealth without getting into the supplement, non-supplant issues? Is there a way the ESSA could help, you think, as you face some really challenging times on the budgetary front for the Pennsylvania?
No, absolutely, we're very hopeful. As you shared, Pennsylvania is no stranger to budgetary constraints and issues and challenges. I mean, we've just gone almost the better part of of a year without a budget in place. Whereas on average we continue to look as if we fund our per pupil funding is amongst the top quartile. But in actuality, when you look at the disparity between our poorest school districts and our wealthier school districts, we have the greatest gap, one of the greatest gaps in the country. And so when you think specifically of the opportunities we really want to engage in, and we're being very intentional in doing this through ESSA, through the ESSA authorization and submission, is to look at funding and resources as opportunities to think much more holistically about the needs of students. So, I'll give you a few examples. By engaging in terms of community school rhetoric and community schools practice, bringing in stakeholders that will engage in meeting the non-academic needs of students, by tackling issues like food security, ensuring that our children have access to healthy breakfast, lunch, and other meals, even weekend meals in some cases, by looking at working with our Department of Health around immunization standards and meeting those needs, Department of Human Services around providing mental health services for students in our education community. So, we've already started under, and this is another area where the governor has been a strong advocate and aggressive. So we've started engaging in discussions cross-agency to find ways to best serve communities through schools. And now, as part of this, this fact finding and as part of the feedback that we're receiving around ESSA, we will embed that vision, and meeting those students' needs as part of the conversation. We also notice when you think of, I shared quickly educator effectiveness. Well, if we find a way, of identifying and ensuring, we have the best teachers in our schools, not solely based on, again, on one standard measure, but multiple measures of success. Well, kids will have access to a great, a better prepared, better, equipped individual to educate them, which would then, take away some of the other restrictions that we sometimes find, in our buildings. And around accountability and assessment, if we move away from one single measure, a cookie cutter measure of accountability, we can then focus on the needs of students. And when you focus on the needs of kids, resources follow. So even when they're minimal resources, at least if you're being strategic with those minimal resources, you'll be successful.
You are adding support for students. The last thing is I'm going to give you two options. You can answer one question or you can answer a different question, but given our time, I'm going to you pick which one. One question would be, all right, so we gave you a couple of thoughts before this interview about questions that might be asked where you thought might be important. Option A is, what question did I fail to ask, Secretary Rivera, that I should have asked that you would like to make some comments about? That's one option. Second option is, you've now had a chance, although I'd be surprised if anyone were familiar with every single verse and chapter of the Every Student Succeeds Act, but you've got a pretty good sense of the Act. What did they leave out? What should have been there that wasn't there? So, two different questions. On this interview, what should we have asked that we didn't ask? Or secondly, what would you have liked to have seen in Every Student Succeeds Act that frankly didn't make its way to the process?
So because they're still engaged in really deep discussion, and the U.S. Department of Education will be providing guidance. I don't think I can answer the latter question yet, because there's just so much left to be shared and explained.
Well, there may be something they left out, but it's hard to say.
But it's hard to say.
Okay,
right.
All right.
With my luck, by the time this airs, they would have addressed it, and then it'd be a moot issue.
That's true.
But I do think when we're thinking about engaging in this conversation, the word every. So it's always interesting, and since President Johnson, every educational law policy pushed forward has always said all, every, each, and there's an implication there. There's an expectation there that schools across the country are going to be providing equitable opportunities for students in each and every school, in each and every community, every student. And I think, quite often then when we start to dig deeper down around the creation of education policy, or around distribution of resources for students, or around meeting the needs of communities, we sometimes tend to forget that every means each and every. And students must be provided equal access to quality education, regardless of zip code, regardless of ethnic demographic, regardless of socioeconomic standing. And I think as we're really deeply engaging in this conversation around opportunities and challenges, we can't lose sight of the fact that we continue to have a very growing poor community, a very growing population of students who are in need of socio-economic support, in need of socio-emotional support, in need, in terms of mental health services. We still have students who are in great need. And I think as we're engaging in this national dialogue, it's understanding that if we're having a conversation about every student being successful, students who poor as well as well off, it's English language learners, it's students with special needs, it's students who may be in a traditional family, or students who are in foster care. And I think as we have this conversation on resources, focus, and development of educational opportunities, it's important that we really tune into and become very sensitive to terms of equity, and ensure that we have equitable opportunities and equitable distribution of resources for our most vulnerable kids.
Very good. Very, very helpful. Secretary Rivera.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
It's great. It is our honor. We thank you for the opportunity to spend some time with you. We hope this will be useful not only for you, but really for a lot of other chiefs across the country and other people who are involved in this. One last thing I would say is that your comments about the importance of stakeholders across the board, not only officials like governors or people like classroom teachers that are out there on the front lines every day, but the legislators and other officials involved in this process. One of the advantages of this kind of partnership with the Education Commission of the states is a lot of those people will be those that are watching this particular discussion, I hope, and having an opportunity to hear your particular encouragements that that you pay attention to key issues such as equity, that you pay attention to all the range of stakeholders, and that you never quit trying to communicate with all of those parties that have an interest in American education. So thank you again, Secretary Rivera, for your time.
Thank you for the opportunity to share.
Absolutely.